Hi, I'm sat here still with Dr. Paul Fuller and Justin, who will talk to you shortly. In another video, we've heard a phrase related to Buddhism in parts of Southeast Asia, particularly Burma and Sri Lanka, which was Militant Buddhism. Now, that goes against some of our preconceptions of Buddhism. How are Buddhists in the West, or scholars of Buddhism in the West, react to this phrase or this idea?
Yeah, I think we have to be very, very careful here, don't we? Because there's things happening in South and Southeast Asia which we may find a bit uncomfortable when Buddhists are reacting in certain ways towards minority groups. So we've got to be careful to say that the Western academic community could come along and say, this isn't real Buddhism, this isn't the way Buddhism is meant to be. And there could be kind of an Orientalist kind of dialogue going on here in the sense that we don't want Buddhism to look like this, so we say this isn't real Buddhism. So Asian Buddhists are not understanding their religion the way that we understand Buddhism to be. So we've got pristine Buddhism in the background somewhere, and this is the one we want to preserve. So we've got to be extremely sensitive to Buddhist traditions themselves in articulating the way they understand their history. So we've got to be very careful here if we don't discriminate against Buddhists because they're not being the type of Buddhists we want them to be. If that makes sense.
So there's a kind of disjunction between the imagined religion or the preference that many scholars have. Often the reason they became scholars of Buddhism is they were attracted towards a certain view, and then reality disappoints, or they're not.
The Buddhists on the ground, the Asian Buddhists, and we've got to be really sensitive to this, to what's going on in Asia, and some of the fears and threats. We've got to take them at kind of face value and to see them for what they are. So we do have to be very careful, I think.
So you kind of caution against Western non-Buddhists, who often happen to be scholars, telling Buddhists how to be Buddhists?
Because we know their textual traditions, we're scholars of Buddhism, we're academics, we read the textual tradition. So let's be a bit careful here. We can definitely criticise what's going on in South and Southeast Asia, but we've also got to understand that our version of Buddhism may not be a correct version of Buddhism, and that's as far as I can go with that.
Okay, thanks. But Justin, you're involved with lots of Buddhists and meet and talk to lots of people. How has the representation of Buddhism changed in the last year or so in terms of this idea of militant Buddhism? How have people responded to it?
Well, I think people have gotten really somewhat worried about what's going on especially in Burma, with Buddhists preaching hate and violence. And there's a kind of a dialogue about discussing what's really going on there and how can we stop it. So I think that's something that a lot of Buddhists in the West are thinking about. How do we best deal with this? How do we intervene? I don't see a lot of discussion. I think maybe academics are having it like, how can we re-envision our understanding of Buddhism or the history of Buddhist societies. I think that's one push that I'm seeing a lot of amongst scholars more, is looking at especially Burma, Sri Lanka, getting a deeper understanding of the history of Buddhism in these places and inter-ethnic strife, which maybe always has been there. And we're just coming to see it now, thanks in part to Twitter. Social media has brought all of this to our doorstep on a day-to-day basis that we didn't have before. But we certainly, if we look at the records, the history of a country like Burma, we see long-standing warfare, the longest ongoing civil war in the world. There's conflicts in the north, there's conflicts in all these different ethnic groups in Burma. Many ethnic groups have their own armies fighting against the central army. So we see that there's ongoing conflict there. It's not as if there once was this nice, peaceful, placid Buddhist kingdom, and that's all just changed recently. So I think that's kind of what people are trying to realize, that the politics, the reality on the ground is not exactly what the texts state they should be, even though, again, as Paul Fuller has mentioned, maybe the rhetoric of even a Buddhist kingdom is of peacefulness. And the rhetoric that a lot of people, Westerners, have brought over from Burma, from India, is that, look, Burma is untouched. It hasn't been defiled by modernity. That's kind of one of these common phrases. And so it preserved Buddhism perfectly. So our imagination, of course, is that therefore they must be peaceful. They must have this idyllic land where there is no strife. But of course, we see now that that isn't the case now, and it probably hasn't been the case.